But I don't think the Eagles are looking at this and saying, okay, well, we got to go get somebody else just to be competent, 2 days in the camp. I think they're going to give these guys some rope because, look, they invested resources in these guys. Fulgham showed them enough last year that you don't want to say, well, he can't play. And there are circumstances in which he can. The question is, is he taking the steps?
I will keep from asking him about the fact that Jake Voracek is no longer here in town. No, we're here to talk Philadelphia Eagles with the best in the city. You read them on the InquirerCard.com, Philly.com. Mike Sielski joins us here on Birds 365. How's your summer going, Michael?
It's very busy, Jody. Very, very busy. Between the Eagles restarting and the Sixers draft, and I've got a book and a podcast about Kobe Bryant that I'm working on, and family is going to Disney World later this month. It just doesn't stop.
Very nice. Let me ask you about the Kobe thing. Knew the book was coming out soon. Podcast attached to it. What is that going to be all about? Where can people listen to the podcast? Is that going to start before the actual release of the book?
It will. It's going to be called Young Mamba. We've got a partnership with iHeartRadio, and it's actually going to be two of the executive producers on it are Anthony Davis and the actor Jonah Hill, who's a big Lakers fan and from the West Coast originally. It's going to be 10 to 12 parts, narrative podcast about Kobe's young life, his early life at Lower Merion in Italy, and the friendships he made, and his development as a player and a person, and all that kind of stuff. And it should be out before the end of the year. We're shooting for November.
Very nice. I want to start at the top with the quarterback with the Philadelphia Eagles, with Jalen Hurts. He's hearing the rumors. He commented about it. He kind of dismissed them, which I was glad to see, that he's not going to continue to field questions about Deshaun Watson or anybody else for that matter. He's just going to stick to his own accomplishments here with this team. How good do those accomplishments have to be, Mike, for him to be the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles in 2022? I know it's kind of obnoxious jumping up to 2022 when we haven't even started 2021, but it is the reality of today because he's not guaranteed or promised anything. You have your idea of how good he's got to be. I have mine. We are going to try and figure out what Howie Roseman and Jeff Lurie and Nick Sirianni think he has to do to establish himself as the future quarterback for years with the Eagles. What is the Sielski ceiling as of right now?
All right. Well, let's preface this discussion by turning Deshaun Watson into franchise quarterback alternative, right? Because the Watson discussion is so fraught with such sensitive and, controversial and really serious topics that go beyond football. Okay. So let's just take Deshaun Watson out of the picture and say Aaron Rodgers, quarterback X, whoever it might be in 2022, just to get that off the table to start. I think the question that's getting missed in some of this discussion goes beyond Jalen Hurts and whoever might replace him, right? In the modern NFL, teams really have a choice to make. They can say, all right, we are going to have a quarterback who we think will be competent or, in a best case scenario, better than competent on a rookie contract. And we can take the rest of the salary cap space that we are not spending on our quarterback and use it to fill out other aspects and areas of the team. Okay. That's what happened in 2017. The Eagles had loads of salary cap space because Carson Wentz was on his rookie deal and Nick Foles' contract really hadn't kicked in and become really expensive yet. And they were able to go get a bunch of veteran players who helped them win a Super Bowl. That team up and down was deep, experienced, really solid. Once you make the decision to go to a franchise quarterback and pay him like one, you have to sacrifice in other areas. And the question becomes, is your quarterback then good enough to kind of carry the team himself to a greater degree than he would have when he was less expensive? So to answer your question, how good does Jalen Hurts have to be? Jalen Hurts has to be pretty good for me, but I don't think he has to be Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, show you right out of the chute that he is as good as whatever franchise quarterback X would be. because you can win in this league if you're smart, if you just have a really good quarterback as opposed to an incredibly great one. Now, the question the Eagles have to answer is, do we want to shoot for the incredibly great one, or do we want to try to build around the guy who's pretty good or very good? I think I know the answer to that question. Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman always want the franchise guy if they can get him. But we'll see. I don't necessarily know that that's the best way to try to win a Super Bowl again, because it's not really how they won it the first time.
And Mike, one thing I wanted to point out was too, and you kind of touched on it, but the whole franchise quarterback conundrum here. There's a franchise with a head coach that's very familiar in this city, Andy Reid. They were able to convince their superstar quarterback to restructure his deal and save the cap space. Do you think maybe if the Eagles could get franchise quarterback X, they would be able to do the same and still plug holes on their roster?
I don't know about that, Jeff, because what would it take for franchise quarterback X to be here in the first place? Are you trading for him? Does he want to be here? Does he want to stay? You know, the situation with Reid and Mahomes in Kansas City, he's the guy that they drafted. And not only did they draft him, they had the kind of quarterback I was already describing in Alex Smith, right? They had a guy who, if you put the right pieces around him, you can do pretty well. Maybe you can't win a Super Bowl. I don't know. I'm always kind of dubious about that idea that, you know, a quarterback who's very good just can't win the Super Bowl. I don't know. I kind of liked Alex Smith. But the point being that the Chiefs said to Mahomes, we are drafting you while we have already a very good starting quarterback, and you are going to start in your second season, even though we have Alex Smith. So they made a commitment to him right up front, and then once he played great, he was willing to make a commitment back to them. The circumstances would be different with the Eagles if they got whoever they would get. So I don't know. To answer your question, I don't know.
All right, let's get real specific about a quarterback that we're talking about here, even though he's not in Philadelphia and may never be in Philadelphia, but I want your take on him just the same, Sielski. Where the Texans are right now with Deshaun Watson, he's in their camp. He's participating. But we know he has this black cloud over him that the NFL acknowledged this week by not putting him on a commissioner's list or not suspending him, that at least as per their investigation, there isn't enough to do so. So he's with the Texans. He doesn't want to be with the Texans. The Texans have probably accepted the fact that we're not going to be able to mend these fences. At some point, we're going to need to move him. But we want to move him and get the most possible. They floated it out there through media sources. Yeah, somewhere around 5 draft picks and 2 starting players would be their asking point. Seven starters. That's all we need for our quarterback. Nothing like starting the bidding process high. How is this going to shake out? Are the Texans doing this correctly, asking for the moon and the stars, and then come back down? If the league doesn't make a decision and he is still there, is he going to walk out of camp? Are they going to let him walk out of camp? How do you think that Deshaun Watson plays down there in Houston?
I think it's fascinating and it's fraught. I would be surprised if he were moved before there were decisions or a decision reached one way or another on the outcome of all these sexual misconduct charges. Unless these teams already are 100% certain of how that circumstance is going to play out, both in the courts, whether they be the civil or criminal courts, or with respect to the NFL. And I don't know that anybody knows that yet. So to answer your question, Jody, I would look, this is a weird situation because he clearly doesn't want to be there. He wants to be traded, to the point that it looked like his attorney, Rusty Hardin, leaked or told ESPN that there had been exactly 10 alleged victims who had filed criminal charges against him.
Right.
Why would his defense attorney want that public? I mean, it didn't make sense unless in some kind of weird, odd way, Hardin was using that and Watson wanted that information out there to try to get the Texans to trade him. I don't understand a lot of what's happening here. And I don't want to pretend to. But it seems to me that given the way that attitudes have evolved about these issues related to Watson away from the field over time, and given how sensitive teams are going to be to that, and the NFL is going to be to that, it would surprise me if anything happened with respect to the Texans moving Watson, regardless of what they want for him or were to get for him, until that issue is resolved.
Mike, one thing that's really concerning me about the Eagles right now is their wide receivers have not been good the first 2 days of camp. Devonta Smith has been as good as advertised, but after him, it's kind of like it's worse than the James Thrash, Todd Pinkston era. Those guys could at least catch a football. These guys, they're so unproven. Do you feel, the Eagles will even try to address this, or they just going with the flow at this point?
I think, Jeff, they're going to go with the flow, as you put it. I think they feel like they have, we're 2 days of camp in. There have been circumstances and issues that have come up with respect to a couple of these guys. My colleague Jeff McClain reported yesterday, for instance, that Jalen Watkins, failed a conditioning test and is dealing with some personal issues, the death of someone close to him, and that contributed to why he wasn't quite prepared for camp. Travis Fulgham is not, quite there yet. Greg Ward missed a day. But I don't think the Eagles are looking at this and saying, okay, well, we got to go get somebody else just to be competent, 2 days in the camp. I think they're going to give these guys some rope because, look, they invested resources in these guys. Fulgham showed them enough last year that you don't want to say, well, he can't play. There are circumstances in which he can. The question is, is he taking the steps and developing in the way that he ought to so that he can contribute this season? Same thing with Rager. Excuse me. I said Jalen Watkins. I meant Jalen Rager. Same thing with Rager. So, I wouldn't look at them and go, oh, okay, well, we got to get somebody in here who can just catch the ball. I think they're going to say, let's let camp play out. We've got a young head coach. Let's let him work with these guys and see, presume that they improve over time.
Mike, if the head coach were a player, I think we describe him as a high motor guy, that's the way he goes about doing his job and doing his business. I think it's entertaining. I'm enjoying watching him and always think it's fun. The question is it actually working with his players? And some of the big-time veterans of this team, the Lane Johnsons and the Jason Kelce's, have come up and taken the coaches back and said he's doing a good job and he's got all the players interested in following him and the like. That's a really good sign when your veteran guys who've been there, done that, been part of a Super Bowl winning team, take his back. We had one report from Michael Robinson of NFL Network who said, not everybody feels this way, that it isn't universally accepted that Coach Sirianni is beloved in that Eagle locker room. How will we judge that from far? They'll know, and you guys will get guys to tell you stuff on the record, off the record, and the like. But is there some other external way we can judge how Nick Sirianni's way of doing things is being received by his team?
Yeah, we can. How hard they play. Not even whether they win or lose games, depending on their talent level and how good Ertz is and, whether young players develop. Do they play hard for him? This to me is an interesting question, Jody, because there's kind of like a generational thing, I feel like, with respect to these sorts of coaching tactics and approaches. I don't know if you guys saw it on social media this morning. You were probably doing the show, but there's a video clip going around social media of Dan Campbell, the Lions' new coach, doing burpees with his players during warmups. Jeff, you're shaking your head. You probably saw it.
I did. Yes.
And the reactions to that amongst, like, I'm 46. Okay. So the reactions to that generally among media members and football fans who are older than me is like, look at this happy high school horse bleep that this guy is doing, right? That'll wear off in time. And maybe it will. But there is another side to the argument that the modern athlete, people who are younger than me, significantly younger than me, respond to this sort of coaching approach, that they want the coach, the person they're working for, to feel as invested in meaning the players or employees' success as possible. That whole, like, I'm the coach and you're going to listen to me because I'm the coach, doesn't work all the time anymore. It certainly does when you have the credibility of a Bill Belichick, let's say, but even Andy Reid isn't that way all the time and really never has been. So you'll know by whether they are playing hard. That's what you'll know, right? Like even go back to Andy Reid's first season, even in 1999, John Chaney used to say this all the time when he was alive, and you would get him talking about coaching and philosophy and those sorts of things. That he would say, I knew Andy Reid was going to be a terrific coach that first season that he was here in Philadelphia when the Eagles went 5-11, but they were getting better every week and they were playing hard for that guy every single week. You could tell that he was reaching them. And then boom, they went 11-5 the next season and took off. I think that's the prism through which you have to view Sirianni, and that's the prism through which you have to judge him.
Yeah, Mike, and you kind of led into the Dan Campbell thing's awesome, but I want to say the team up I-95 in New York, they're having a little bit of issues right now too. I know Kelvin Benjamin was just cut, and he just ripped on Joe Judge, and I have a feeling a lot of players, that message, like, I'm the coach and you have to listen to me, that could be a huge problem in New York, especially since I hate to tell New York Giants fans this, they were not good last year. They were still only 6-10.
Yeah, there's the narrative and the pushback on that, Jeff, of course, is that they were 5-3 in the second half of the season and getting better all the time. And Judge had instituted and installed a sense of discipline and accountability and all those sorts of things. And maybe, I mean, the flip side, we can take both sides of everything. Like the flip side of what you're saying could be that just Kelvin Benjamin was being a jerk, right, and wasn't doing what Joe Judge wanted him to do. And other guys in the locker room were looking around and saying, "Go, coach! Yeah, you're right to get in his face that way." Again, that'll play out. You're right. They weren't a good team last year. And this is going to, in all these discussions, it's going to come down to the talent that's assembled and are they able to develop? And in the Giants case, will Daniel Jones continue turning the ball over, like he's handing out Girl Scout cookies at the front of a supermarket? But, it's going to be interesting because Judge is an interesting case study in that regard because he is a younger coach, right? He's in his, late 30s, early 40s. He's not 65. He's not, my way or the highway. If you don't do it my way, go run gassers for 10 minutes. So we'll see. The whole division, the whole NFC East is just so weird and unpredictable. And, I still think Washington will be the team to beat. I'm higher on Ryan Fitzpatrick's fit there than most people are. I know he'll lose them a couple of games, but he'll also become, they won 7 games last year, basically with the 3 of us at starting quarterback, right? So, that defense is really good. But we'll see.
I like your answer on both of the last 2 questions. Let me try and phrase it a different way from a different perspective. Nick Sirianni, how he's going to be handled, the way the Eagles are going to be mentally prepared for this season. How much can you draw from what happens with and to Zach Ertz as to how this is going to play? Because the coaches certainly got say, but does he have the ultimate say? No, Howie Roseman is going to determine whether Zach Ertz is even here or not, whether he will trade him, whether he will cut him, or whether he'll be here and play but not play that much, or play and play plenty because the coach realizes he's one of my best players. I better get him out there onto the field. Is Zach Ertz going to be something we will point to say, yes, now we know how the Eagles are going to play and how the Eagles are going to be run and how exactly Nick Sirianni is going to do his job coaching this team?
I'm not sure about that, Jody, for the reason you cited, that the separation between the decision makers in the front office, i.e. Howie Roseman and his team, and Sirianni and the lack of relative power that he has, really it's pretty wide. If Howie gets a chance to trade Zach Ertz, I think he'll trade Zach Ertz. I just think it hasn't happened yet because no team has presented an offer commensurate with what they think Ertz is worth. But the other side of that is the NFL isn't the NBA. It isn't a league where you can tank really and have it help you, right? The Cleveland Browns notwithstanding, that team needed to flush everything for a long, long time. And even then, they ended up hiring Freddie Kitchens after they, had flushed everything. So, but there is value in having guys like Ertz and Brandon Graham and Jason Kelce, even on a young team that is not expected to compete and challenge for a Super Bowl this year. There is something to football culture. And so from Sirianni's standpoint, I could totally see him saying, you know what, Zach Ertz is a pro. He can help us and he fits into my offense in these regards. I can use him. Maybe he's healthier and back to being closer to the Zach Ertz we saw in 2017, 18, and 19, rather than the one who played last year and was kind of a shell of himself. And even if the Eagles aren't competing even for the NFC East championship, it might be good for Sirianni to have Ertz playing a lot, just to have a guy who is a pro's pro, who has been there and done that, doing that for a team that's full of young players.
Mike, Darius Slay has been pretty vocal this offseason. I mean, you've seen it on social media. He's always retweeting obscure stats, and I am the king of obscure stats. So he's been retweeting a lot of like my stuff about pass deflections, about his pass rating against. But we got to be realistic here. He wasn't what he was advertised in Detroit. He just wasn't that type of player. How concerning will it be for the Eagles if you get the 2020 Darius Slay in 2021?
It's concerning. Look, everybody's talking about how the Eagles stabilized their secondary by signing Steven Nelson, right? You got a number 2 cornerback. Now you can move Avonte Maddox to the slot where he's more comfortable, et cetera, et cetera. The Eagles were really bad in pass defense last season. It was not good. And so, yeah, they're going to be better. But you're right. I don't think Darius Slay, I think what you're talking about, Jeff, is he was not a big play cornerback, right?
Didn't live up to the nickname.
Yeah, and there was an expectation that he was going to be. This was a defense that really struggled to force turnovers last season, and that was such a hallmark of the defense, particularly in that Super Bowl season, right? Every time they needed, a sack fumble or an interception, they seemed to get one. Some of that is circumstance, but some of that is the nature of the players that you have in that secondary. And I'm curious to see how this plays out. Maybe Josh Sweat, or Derek Barnett kind of develop and emerge as pass rushers, which forces some hurried throws from quarterbacks, which leads to interceptions or whatever the case may be. That's kind of the rosiest scenario you can come up with. But it's never just the one guy, right? It's never just, Slay doesn't intercept enough passes. Well, there's got to be passes thrown that he can intercept. Pardon me. So it all kind of plays off of one another. So, he can tweet out his stats all he wants, but guys like Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham and Derek Barnett are going to have a lot to do with whether he gets those kind of stats that he wants.
Darius Slay et al. On that defense are going to be the minions of Jonathan Gannon, who we heard from for the second time yesterday, and he once again emphasized turnovers. Part of his quote-unquote hits philosophy is turnovers. And there were drills they were running yesterday where you saw the emphasis on the attempt to get turnovers. Can he pull that off, Mike? Can you actually coach up turnovers? Can you put things in place to get yourself turnovers for your team? Or could that actually open up a door to making some mistakes defensively if you put too much of an emphasis on it?
I mean, it's great to work on, Jody, but I think some of that is just the mentality of a particular player at a particular position, right? Like, remember Peanut Tillman with the Bears, years ago, just seemed to force fumbles and, intercept passes. He was just a guy who did that kind of thing. So it's great that Gannon is accentuating that and is getting that into players' minds. But yeah, I mean, they still have to be fundamentally sound, right? You still have to be able to tackle. And you see that often, right? That players try to strip the ball and a big running back or a big tight end just rumbles past them because they didn't think, they weren't sound enough to grab the guy's legs and tackle him to the ground. They were worrying too much about taking the ball away. So I think some of that is just inherent in the players you have. And let's see if, some of the new guys that the Eagles have or some of the younger guys that they're giving more snaps to are just kind of tend to force more turnovers. I don't know how much Gannon can do to make it happen.
Mike, I think it's pretty clear Howie Roseman controls the 53-man roster here. But in the Doug Pearson era, it was more – I don't think there was much collaboration between the two. And I think that's where the friction started. Do you think Howie has kind of learned his lesson here and will actually talk to Nick Sirianni, Jonathan Gannon about and before he makes final decisions here?
I mean, he'll talk to them, but their front office and their structure is set up the way it is for a reason. There was a reason they ended up hiring Doug Peterson as a head coach. There's a reason, in a particularly infamous column I wrote before their Super Bowl season, I referred to Doug as a potted ficus while he was standing next to Howie Roseman during an NFL draft press conference. Is because the Eagles believe that the coach should coach, generally speaking, and he should offer some input into the roster, but he doesn't have final say by any stretch of the imagination. He doesn't even have as much say as a lot of coaches around the league. That comes down to Howie and his staff. And so, I mean, they'll talk to Nick, I'm sure, but Nick ain't going to be making the decisions here in any regard. They haven't changed that approach as far as I know.
It's funny that you brought up that very famous Spikus line that you used, because this year in the draft afterwards press conference, yeah, we heard a lot more from Nick Sirianni than we ever did Doug Peterson in any of the drafts that he was ever here for. Do you think that was just Howie Roseman letting his new guy have his say and his moment on center stage, or do you think he actually will have at least a little bit more to say than Doug did when it came to actual roster construction?
I think he'll have more to say in press conferences than Doug did, Jody. Because Sirianni, that's just his personality, is naturally, outgoing, gregarious. We're going to compete against competition who are competitors, et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is not, I don't think, I'm always hesitant to kind of read into how much a coach or executive says in a press conference. Their actions always kind of speak louder than their words. Sure. And you can glean some insights here and there, but I'd be surprised if Sirianni had any more polls, so to speak, in the front office than Peterson did.
Mike, what would you consider a successful season for the Eagles, given everything that happened last year?
I mean, I think anything better than 4-11-1. And as I said earlier, the indications that they believe in Nick Sirianni. That's the important thing, right? It's the retest. It's the, we're 5-11, but we've got Donovan McNabb. The defense is really good, and you can see this guy knows what he's doing. And if we get the right players around this coach and this quarterback and on this roster, good things can happen. Chip Kelly was different. Chip Kelly, even though they went 10-6 both of his first 2 years, you didn't have that sense around him within the locker room. You kind of had this like, is this really working? I don't know about this guy. I don't like this, and that made it that much more dubious about, is this going to work in the long term, even though the team's record was really good. Same thing with Doug. Like, you could see Doug could scheme an offense. Those first 3 weeks in 2016, when they got out to that 3-0 start, and they were whipping the Steelers, and all of that, and everybody, and Wentz looked great. You could see that he had the kind of coaching mind, just designing plays at the time that showed he was pretty smart. That to me is that's where the proof in the pudding will be. Is do they look like a competent team that has the potential to improve? Is it just that they need better players, or is it that they don't know what they're doing? They're misusing timeouts. They're not prepared for certain strategic things. That'll be the way you'll judge Sirianni and the team, I think.
Mike, last one for me, and I want to play into Jeff's question, just look at it a little differently, judging the Eagles' overall 2021 season when it's over and done with. The way the schedule's laid out, it's pretty tricky early, and it gets easier late. Now, that's my evaluation, and I can be as wrong as the next guy. We always think we know exactly what are the hard parts, what are the easy, and then we find out it's the exact opposite. But they got all those division games late, and last year the division wasn't good. I think it'll be better this year, but I don't think it's going to be great. If they finish up strong, will we say, hey, that's a really good sign because it took time to get used to Coach Sirianni and they were building things, but they came on strong late? Or will we say, well, yeah, they beat up a couple of their other weakling division mates late in the season? How do you balance the way the schedule seems to lay out versus are they actually making improvements over the year?
Well, let me preface my answer with the caveat that I love the NFL. Part of the reason I love the NFL is the unpredictability of it. A new coach comes in and nobody knows what he's going to do, and that sometimes can propel a team to a surprising season. And you start week 1 with the Falcons, and that to me, that is a game that is, I hate saying this, but it is prime for the Eagles to get beat and get beaten soundly. Ooh. Because the Falcons have an established, experienced veteran quarterback in Matt Ryan, who's going to be running a new system with some new toys, including Kyle Pitts at tight end. And Arthur Smith is a well-regarded offensive mind. that just seems to me one of those games where a team makes changes in the offseason and it gets them off to a quick start right away. And that team is not the Eagles. Having said that, I think any victory against teams in your own division is inherently more valuable than teams outside your division. So to answer your question, Jody, if they're winning 3 out of the last 4 games of the season against the NFC East, I think it will be regarded as, okay, they're improving. It won't matter whether the division is good or bad, because those are the games that matter more. You got to beat the Giants. You got to beat the Cowboys. You got to beat Washington. So no matter how bad the division is, the team and its fans will look at that and say, okay, well, relative to the teams that matter most to us and to the Eagles, we stack up pretty well. And let's take that into 2022.
No, we'll see if it plays out that way. All right, Mike, understand the podcast for the Kobe book is going to start before the end of the year. Again, give us the time frame as to when the book is actually going to be available.
Book's called The Rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality. It'll be in stores on January 11th. You can pre-order it on Amazon or anywhere else you get your books anytime before then. And please do, because that'll allow me to rocket to the top of the New York Times bestseller list before the book even hits the stores.
That's our goal, is to get Sielski on top of that New York Times bestseller.
Thank you, Jody.
John, Mike, always a pleasure, buddy. We'll be tapping into you again soon enough.
Thanks, guys. I enjoyed it.
Our pleasure.